Welcome to Hood Politics. In this episode, I will be discussing how Crips and Bloods spread to cities and towns all over America. The facts of the case are as follows. America has always loved gangsters, from the days of the Western outlaw when names like Billy the Kid and Jesse James rang bells, to the old school mobsters such as Lucky Luciano and Al Capone, who ran the streets of Chicago with an iron fist, all the way up to more modern legends such as John Gotti, Sammy the Bull, and Frank Lucas. People are intrigued by the gangster lifestyle and admire how they live in a world that doesn't abide by societal norms and laws, a world where money and power means everything, and disputes aren't settled in the court of law, but on the streets. There has been thousands of books, documentaries, TV shows, and movies based on these almost mythical figures. On the streets of Los Angeles is no different. There are people who are viewed the same way, such as Raymond Washington, who founded the Crips in 1969, and Stanley Tookie Williams, an early member of the Crips who ultimately became the face of the gang after being sentenced to death for committing 4 murders in 1979. Other notable figures are T. Rogers, who bought the Black P-Stones from Chicago to LA, and Sylvester Puddin' Scott, an original Piru member that's credited with helping align the Pirus with the Black P-Stones, Brims, Bishops, Denver Lanes, Chain Gang, Bounty Hunters, Athens Park Boys, and other anti-Crip gangs to form the Bloods in the mid-1970s. Early on, feuds between the Crips and Bloods were settled with fists, and occasionally, weapons such as knives and bats were used, and gunplay was rare, but one day, that all changed. The Crips say the Bloods fired the first shot, and the Bloods say the Crips fired the first shot, but either way, once gunplay was introduced, it was no going back, and over the next 50 years, tens of thousands of people would be killed in the war, gang members and civilians. Throughout the wars, gangs never saw a dip in membership, and due to family ties, neighborhood pride, or a need for revenge, young men and women were eager to join the war and kill or be killed in the name of their gang. In response to the violence, the Los Angeles Police Department established the CRASH unit in 1979. CRASH stood for Community Resources Against Street Hoodlums. The goal of the unit was to suppress gang-related crimes in the city. Each of the LAPD's 18 divisions had a CRASH unit assigned to it. During the early 1980s, crack hit the streets of LA. Initially, it was seen as a party drug and a quick, cheap way to get high, a stark contrast to cocaine, which was viewed as a rich person's drug. But within a short time of crack hitting the streets, the perception completely changed. People started getting addicted, and seemingly overnight, LA completely transformed. People who were once well-respected and upstanding members of the community could now be seen walking the streets, doing anything for enough money to afford their next high. This led to families being destroyed and kids losing one or both parents to addiction, jail, or death, as well as parents losing their children to the same things. Prior to crack, most gang members had to make a choice. Either they would be a dealer or gangbanger, but during the 1980s, they decided to do both. It wasn't uncommon for someone to make upwards of $1,000 a day. The low overhead and big profits led to dealers wanting to carve out their share of the market. This gave rise to numerous organizations, such as Whitey Enterprises and Third World. These were rival drug gangs that waged a war on the streets of South Central for control of the lucrative territory. The organizations had well over 100 drug houses between them, and each group employed hundreds of people with positions like messengers, lookouts, cooks, dealers, bodyguards, and hitmen. Whitey Enterprises was affiliated with the 5 Deuce Broadway Crips, and Third World was affiliated with the rival Ford Trey Gangster Crips. These were the early stages of the drug wars and gang wars intertwining. The drug money was being used to fund the gang wars, and the influx of cash gave way to the arms race. Long gone were the days of rusty 6-shooters. The new weapons of choice were AKs, Uzis, Mac-10s, and 17-round pistols. The new level of violence was uncontrollable. The nightly news was filled with stories of robberies, drive-by shootings, and murders. Law enforcement officials decided to crack down on the dealers. This led to things like televised raids of suspected drug houses. The cameras would roll as officers kicked in doors or connected cables from a tow truck to reinforced doors and pulled them from the home, as a team of officers ran into the home and placed everyone in handcuffs. Another tool used by law enforcement during the drug war was the battering ram. These armored vehicles were first used by the U.S. Army during the Vietnam War and later for security at a nuclear facility. By the early 1980s, the vehicles were decommissioned. The LAPD initially acquired them for security purposes during the 1984 Olympics, but after the games ended, the U.S. government expressed no interest in reclaiming them, so the LAPD made arrangements to keep the vehicles. They were each painted dark blue to match LAPD colors and outfitted with 14-foot steel rams that would easily breach the wall of any building. On February 8, 1985, LAPD Chief Daryl Gates unveiled the vehicles. That same night, SWAT officers decided to execute a search warrant in the neighborhood of Pacoima, located roughly 20 miles north of downtown LA. Officers Crips surrounded the home. They then launched a flashbang through one of the home's windows, and moments later, they used the battering ram to breach the house. Officers expected to find drugs and weapons, but instead, they were met by Linda Johnson, her son Marcus, and Dolores Langford, who was visiting with her 2 children. After an extensive search of the home, officers only found a small trace of paraphernalia, and a ledger that they believe was used to keep track of sales. When asked why the search didn't turn up anything, officials claimed that the suspects must have already sold out by the time of the raid. Investigators claimed that undercover officers had bought drugs from the home in the days prior to the raid. Linda was arrested and charged with suspicion of child endangerment, and Marcus was taken into protective custody. Linda's husband, Antonio, wasn't home during the raid, but was later arrested and charged with suspicion of selling drugs. Linda and Antonio denied the LAPD's claims and said their home was never a drug house. She went on to say that the security doors and windows were for protection. Neighbors also didn't believe law enforcement's claims, stating that they never saw an unusual amount of traffic visit the home. During this time, the drug market in LA had become oversaturated. The low barrier to entry and huge profits had created a stream of newcomers looking to make some fast cash, with the running joke being that there was more dealers than users. The oversaturated market, in addition to the violence and pressure from law enforcement, forced dealers to begin looking for opportunities elsewhere, so they began venturing out to places like Seattle, Washington, Portland, Oregon, Phoenix, Arizona, Houston, Texas, and numerous other cities and towns.
We look next tonight at the growing gang culture in cities throughout the United States. Many activities of the estimated 70,000 gang members in Los Angeles County have been covered by the media. However, the NewsHour has discovered, and the Justice Department confirmed in a recent report, that some Los Angeles-based gangs are on the move.
These deadly traveling salesmen have first moved up the West Coast to Portland, Oregon, and Seattle. There was very little competition in the drug markets there. Next, they moved into the country's heartland, Kansas City, Des Moines, Omaha, St. Louis. Others went south to Dallas, Phoenix, Oklahoma City, and Shreveport, Louisiana. The Bloods and the Crips have blazed a trail of drugs and violence to the east as well, Akron, Ohio, York, Pennsylvania, Baltimore. They're even in Hawaii and Alaska. In fact, it's now estimated that they're in some 55 cities across the country.
So you guys are Bloods?
Yeah, Crenshaw Mafia. Inglewood Watts, Crenshaw Mafia, Gangster Blood, 104th Street.
Such affiliations carry with them decades-old hostilities between those Los Angeles neighborhoods true to the Crips and those loyal to the Bloods. Giving the wrong hand sign,
Crip killer for life,
or wearing the wrong color can mean death. The Bloods claim the color red, the Crips blue, and anyone wearing a rival color is fair game. The whole community got the message when non-gang member Cameron Smith was gunned down for wearing a red Oklahoma Sooners cap.
I get a kick out of it. I like bang, you know what I'm saying? Blood killer.
Is there anything anybody could do to get you out of a gang?
No. I don't want to get out.
The only way we're going to get out this crippin' is when we 6 feet under. Like I told you, you ain't going to stop. You understand?
Crip or die, crip or cry.
Ain't nobody out there. Hopefully.
One day we was chilling on the street called 23rd. We all grew up together. We all Crips, right? All our homies came down here like from California, anywhere. They came down here and got with us. Yeah. They joined with us.
Yeah, that's right.
You know, and everybody just turned Crip.
I was going to school and shit. I wasn't fucked up about gang banging. I didn't know nothing about gang banging. He was gang banging, and what they was doing looked fun to me. You know what I'm saying? They was cripping and shit, and they had cars and money and this and that, and they was out on their own, you know? So shit, I wanted to do that kind of shit. So I got into winning.
This 20-year-old Blood gang member came from Inglewood, California to St. Louis about a year ago.
Ounce in Los Angeles costs $4.25. You bring it to St. Louis, you can sell it for $1,000, so you're making a bigger profit.
Police estimate that some 50 to 100 Crips and Bloods have set up business in St. Louis in the past year.
You know, it's not unusual at all to stop a 12 to 13-year-old kid, 14-year-old kid with $1,000 on it.
That kind of money and what it buys has made places like Southeast High School a target for recruiting.
My brother hang around the Crips, and he's supposed to be a Kansas City Crip, you know, and they trying to get Kansas City boys to join that group.
I'm a Crip.
Since the so-called LA boys hit town, beepers are now the status symbol among many Kansas City kids.
The reason why I want the beepers because I seen everybody else, you know, wearing a beeper, and I was like, oh, wow, those are neat, and I hear a little beeper go off. And then somebody said, well, those beepers, you know, some of them are for cocaine dealers.
Some dealers had family or friends that lived in these places, so the transition was easy. Others literally picked a destination, checked into a motel, and learned the city. They would go to drug areas and scout the local market. They would study their operation, how much traffic they were getting, as well as police presence. When the time was right, the LA dealers would make their move. This usually went one of three ways. One method was to approach the local dealers and make them an offer. Seeing how drugs sold for triple the price in many of these places, the LA dealers were able to offer them lower prices. Also, the LA dealers could provide them with better quality product, because by the time most of these places received a shipment, it had been cut multiple times along the way. So of course, many of the locals jumped at the opportunity and formed partnerships with the LA dealers. Another method was to undercut the locals and take their customers. Another method was violence. The LA dealers would start feuds with the locals and attempt to take over. Sometimes they were successful, and other times they had underestimated their competition. By 1988, multiple cities and towns had felt the effects of LA-style dealing and gangbanging, but many more places would soon be inspired to follow suit. In April of 1988, the movie Colors was released in theaters. The film follows a streetwise veteran cop named Bob Hodges and his hot-headed rookie partner, Danny McGavin, as they navigate the gang-infested streets of LA, where the Crips, Bloods, and Latino gangs are at war. The movie gave the nation an inside look at the gang problem that had engulfed the city. To accompany the movie, rapper Ice-T released the song Colors, which helped promote the film even more. The movie opened to a great reception and long box office lines, but some politicians and community groups felt that it glorified gang life.
Already it has sparked a variety of protests and worries that it could inspire more violence.
It incites and inflames the issue.
Like pouring gasoline on a fire. We have a fire going already.
One deputy sheriff warns if the movie is shown here, there will be dead bodies from one end of town to the other. The NAACP is asking that it be banned in Los Angeles.
What it will do is incite young gang members to kill policemen, incite young gang members like they're doing now to shoot people on the street.
Despite the controversy, the film is opening at 400 theaters nationwide, 70 in this city alone. But officials here say anyone wearing gang emblems, the colors referred to in the movie title, will not be admitted.
During the filming, real gang members were used as extras. Bear, who was a reputable member of the 8-9 East Coast Crips, told a story about law enforcement going into his neighborhood and rounding up active gang members and then taking them to the sheriff's station to meet with the film's producers. J-Bone, who was another reputable member of 8-9, had also been taken to meet the film's producers and ended up playing the role of a Crip named Dogman in the movie. He could be seen riding in the van during one of the film's most iconic scenes. Don Cheadle, who played a Crip named Rocket in the film, spoke about meeting J-Bone for the first time.
Day one, I got in my wardrobe and, you know, I'm all blued out, head to foot. And I'm sitting on this park bench and I'm just kind of waiting because we're getting ready to shoot. And this dude comes walking by and I'm just kind of looking at him, you know, like, oh, I wonder if he's an actor. No, he was not. He was not an actor. And he was not acting. His name was J-Bone, and he was for real. And he saw me. He just walked all the way up to me. He's like, what's up, cuz? I was like, yo, what's up? He's like, what set you with, man? I was like, well, what set you claiming? I was like, I'm just an actor. He's like, all right, I just want to see what the fuck was up. I was like, okay. And then he left, and I was like, wow, this is going to be a very interesting movie. So J-Bo's sitting behind me in the thing, and we get ready to do the shot, and I'm like, man, shut the fuck up. And we cut, and he's like, shut the fuck, you sound soft as fuck, man. Sound like a punch, shut the fuck up. And so I'm like, no, we got to do this thing for real. So then I was like, for real, J-Bone, shut the fuck up, for real. He's like, what? Like, I'll smoke you in this car right now. I was like, I'm about to get killed on the set of a movie for saying my lines as an actor in the scene.
As the crew moved around to film in different locations, the local gangs in the area would show up to set, and on occasion, rival gangs would show up as well and linger around until the production crew left. Then there would be a fight or shooting. The film's director, Dennis Hopper, stated that 10 people were killed during the course of filming. Numerous theaters decided not to show the film, while others hired extra security guards just in case any violence took place over the opening weekend. Most theaters reported the showings going well, with the exception of a few incidents at California theaters. In one incident, two rival gangs began fighting in front of the Pacific Warner Theater in Huntington Park. There were around 14 people involved in the brawl. In another incident, 8 gang members were arrested at the Hollywood Pacific Theater in Hollywood after being involved in a scuffle while waiting in line. Moments after that incident, 2 other gang members exited the theater and picked a fight with some of the patrons in line. These incidents were considered light in comparison to one that has become part of the film's legacy. On Sunday, April 24th, 1988, a group of people ventured to the Regency Theater in North Stockton to see Colors. Among the group was a 19-year-old 17-year-old man named David Dawson, his girlfriend, sister, and brother-in-law. David was wearing a blue bandana around his head, blue pants, and blue shoelaces. As the group waited in line to buy tickets for the next showing, 3 men with red bandanas approached David. One of them asked if he was a Ricket, which is a derogatory term for Crip. David's girlfriend then stepped between them and attempted to prevent a fight. The man walked away and went to his car, a 1988 Chrysler that had been rented in LA. The other 2 men then began fighting with David's brother-in-law. When David went to his aid, the man returned from his car with a gun and opened fire. David attempted to run, but was struck in the head and collapsed. The bullet continued to travel and grazed a 17-year-old bystander. The suspects then ran to the Chrysler and fled the scene. David was later pronounced dead. A witness was able to get the car's license plate, and before long, investigators had the name of their suspect, a 21-year-old Blood member named Charles Queen. Detectives learned that Charles had fled the state after the shooting, so they contacted federal authorities to help track him down. A few weeks later, authorities arrested Charles at a laundromat in Beaumont, Mississippi, and charged him with David's murder. Charles said that he believed David was reaching for a gun, so he opened fire in self-defense. Investigators believed the shooting was purely gang-motivated. They said Charles was upset with the way the Bloods were depicted in the film, so when he saw someone that he believed was a Crip, he wanted to release his frustration. Charles Queen was sentenced to 27 years to life in prison. In August of 1988, rap group NWA released the album Straight Outta Compton. The hard beats and tales of drugs and violence took the country by storm and gave the nation a look of what life was like on the streets of LA. Prior to Colors and Straight Outta Compton, most viewed LA as being home to the stars and believed that sunshine, palm trees, and nice beaches were the only things plaguing the city. The migration of LA dealers and gangs didn't occur solely due to drugs. Some people were on the run from law enforcement or had family in other places, or a combination of both. One such case involved a 15-year-old young man named Daryl Bailey. Daryl was a member of the Six Deuce Harvard Park Brims and went by the nickname Trigger. On August 31st, 1988, Daryl ventured into Crip territory and opened fire into multiple crowds of people. One of his victims was a 14-year-old young man named Jerry Huff. Jerry was cleaning his brother's car when Daryl approached him on foot and opened fire. Luckily, Jerry and the other victim survived. Daryl was later arrested and charged with 6 counts of attempted murder. During the trial, Daryl fled and made his way to St. Louis, where he had family. The Bailey family was well known in St. Louis and were deep in the drug game. The Baileys also played a big part in the Bloods being established in St. Louis. Daryl was profiled on the TV show America's Most Wanted, and the tips began pouring in. An anti-gang task force tracked Daryl to his aunt's house in St. Louis, but by the time officers got there, he was gone. On January 8th, 1990, at around 7 p.m., investigators received a tip that Daryl was at another home in nearby Velda Village, so officers began watching the home. When one man exited the house and drove away, officers pulled him over and questioned him. The man admitted that Daryl was at the home. At 2:15 a.m., officers searched the house and found Daryl hiding in the attic. He was arrested and extradited back to LA.
Tonight, Daryl Bailey is in the custody of St. Louis police awaiting extradition to California.
Are you glad it's over?
Yeah, but I'd rather have it lawyer. Right now, I'm just hoping that goes through.
St. Louis was also home to one of the most notorious cases of homegrown gangs adopting the Crip and Blood identity. The Boys of Destruction, also known as BOD, started off as a breakdancing crew. They would go to different neighborhoods around St. Louis and battle other groups. One of their opposing groups was the Horseshoe Posse. The Horseshoe Posse got their name from the shape of the streets in their neighborhood. During the early 1980s, the groups were on good terms. They attended the same schools and would hang out together from time to time. And whenever they had tension, things were resolved with a fist fight. One of the most reputable members of BOD was a man named Dorsey Brandon. Dorsey grew up tough and had been shot for the first time at 14 years old. Dorsey quickly took on a leadership role within BOD, and in 1986, he wanted the group to take a new direction. Crack hit the streets of St. Louis hard, and Dorsey wanted the BODs to carve out a share of the market for themselves, so they transitioned from a breaking group to a gang. The BODs jumped in the game with both feet and quickly became one of the top gangs in the city. They were responsible for numerous shootings and multiple murders. Following the release of Colors, Bloods and Crips hit St. Louis like a plague, with the new and pre-established gangs picking up the identities. The BODs and Horseshoe Posse both became blood gangs, but Dorsey felt that there were too many Bloods on his side of town and everyone was too friendly, so he and the BODs decided to become Crips and picked up a whole roster of enemies by doing so, one being the Horseshoe Posse. From that point on, the BODs and the Horseshoe Posse became bitter enemies. The gangs were separated by a single street, Martin Luther King Drive. In addition to their close proximity, they all knew one another, down to their home addresses and and hangout spots, which took the rivalry to a new level and made it one of the worst gang wars in St. Louis history. Dorsey's equal within the Horseshoe Posse was a man named Tyrone McClinton, also known as Hitman T. Just like Dorsey, Hitman was a known shooter, and he and Dorsey had been involved in multiple shootouts throughout the years, but neither of them were hit in those incidents. On Monday, March 11th, 1991, Hitman was in the lot of a service station at the intersection of Vandervender and St. Louis Avenue. Moments later, someone approached him with a shotgun and opened fire, striking him in the back. Hitman was transported to St. Louis University Hospital and died 3 hours later. He was 17 years old. Hitman's murder wasn't enough. Shortly after his death, someone spray painted "Dead Man T" on a nearby wall. 1 week later, Hitman's funeral was held at the Wade Funeral Home. Bloods from all over the city showed up to pay their respects. Someone tagged a vacant building across the street from the funeral home. It read, "Crip Kill All Day." The Bloods present at the funeral noticed the tagging and became furious, almost causing a riot. 2 months after the funeral, on May 28th at around 3:45 a.m., 2 Molotov cocktails were thrown into the window of Hitman's family home. Luckily, they didn't ignite, and the home's 9 residents were able to make it out of the house safely. Police believe one of Hitman's brothers, nicknamed Chaos, was the intended target. An officer stated that Hitman was never a suspect in the murder, but on the streets it was a different story. The officer went on to say that he would like to ask Hitman's mother, why does she think they called her son Hitman? The war between the BODs and Horseshoe Posse became so deadly that all kind of gruesome stories began circulating. In one story, it said that Dorsey went to Hitman's grave and dug up his body. He then put the remains in the backseat of his car and took them to Hitman's family home and threw them on the front porch. Most believe this incident never occurred and is just a rumor, but it has become attached to the BODs and Horseshoe Posse's legacies. During this time, the streets of St. Louis were on fire. The locals were involved in their own drug wars, and the Bloods and Crips had completely reshaped the city's gang structure. These things will make their way into music, and on October 29th, 1991, rapper Ice Cube released the album Death Certificate. The third track on the album is titled My Summer Vacation. In the song, Ice Cube speaks from the perspective of an LA dealer and gang member looking to escape the oversaturated LA market. So he and a few friends decide to catch a flight to St. Louis. While there, they take over drug territory and go to war with the local crews.
My homie got shot, he's a goner black. St. Louis niggas want they corner back. Shooting in snowy weather, it's illegal business, niggas still can't stick together.
He details how the police were ignorant to LA gangs, which enabled them to operate in plain sight. He ends the song by saying the cops eventually caught on and he was sent to prison. Meanwhile, in St. Louis, the BODs continued to thrive. They controlled a large portion of the drug market and had allies all over the city, and under Dorsey's leadership, the sky was the limit, but ultimately, it all came crashing down. In early October of 1991, Dorsey was standing on a friend's front porch when a car pulled up in front of the house and someone inside of the vehicle opened fire. Dorsey was hit multiple times in the chest, but luckily, he survived. Many believe that Dorsey was either going to slow down or go away for a while, but to their surprise, he did neither. A few weeks after the shooting, on Wednesday, October 30th, 1991, Dorsey was at a club when one of his friends got into an altercation with another man. When Dorsey ran over to help his friend, a car pulled up and someone inside of the vehicle opened fire twice, hitting Dorsey in the chest. The bullet reopened his previous wounds from the shooting a few weeks prior, and he essentially suffocated to death. A responding officer named Ronnie Robinson stated that Dorsey died with a smile on his face. The death of Dorsey shook the BODs to their core, and as more of their key members died or went to prison, the gang's activity slowed down tremendously. Also in 1991, the film Boys in the Hood was released. The movie follows a group of friends as they attempt to navigate the streets of South Central, whether positively or negatively. The film touches on numerous societal issues such as teen fatherhood, gentrification, the nature versus nurture debate, peer pressure, and drug abuse. But the through line of the film focuses on gang violence and features numerous clashes between Crip and Blood gang members. Although the movie was meant to shed a light on gang violence and spark change, in many cases it did quite the opposite. On the film's opening night, there were at least 25 violent incidents in theaters throughout the country. At the Cineplex Odeon in Universal City, California, the audience was just settling into their seats when 3 gunshots rang out. One witness described the scene as chaotic and recalled seeing a gunman chase a group of men around the building. The chaos even spilled into the neighboring theater, with 2 17-year-old women stating that they were watching Terminator 2 when the gunman chased the group into their theater. 5 people were shot as the chaos poured outside the building to a nearby parking garage, but luckily, all of the victims survived.
Well, the trouble that theater owners feared would follow the opening of the movie Boys in the Hood is now a reality. I'm here in Universal City where shots have been fired between 2 rival gangs. Several theaters around town decided not to show the movie because they were afraid that violence would break out just like it has tonight here in Universal City.
Other shootings were reported at theaters in the California cities of Chino, Upland, Pomona, San Francisco, and in Sacramento, when 2 men opened fire on deputies as they tried to break up a fight outside of a theater. A 19-year-old woman was hit 6 times in the chest and shoulder during the incident, but she survived. In Minneapolis, Minnesota, a shot was fired inside a theater. As patrons went outside, some of the crowd spilled into the street. A car drove by, and someone in the vehicle opened fire multiple times. At least 4 people were wounded. In Detroit, Michigan, a teenager was hit in the arm after someone opened fire at a theater. Also, there were 2 separate stabbing incidents at different theaters. In Akron, Ohio, a 16-year-old was hit in the stomach after someone opened fire outside of a theater. In Joliet, Illinois, the film was being shown at the Movie Aid Theater inside the Louis Joliet Mall when a 300-person melee erupted. It's believed that a gunshot sparked the chaos. In Riverdale, Illinois, a man named Michael Booth went to the Halstead Twin Outdoor Theater to see the film, along with his girlfriend and their 1-year-old son. As the family sat in their car waiting to leave the drive-in, someone standing nearby opened fire on Michael. He was struck in his arm, and the bullet pierced his chest and punctured his lung. Moments later, he was pronounced dead. Officers later arrested a man named Timothy Turner and charged him with Michael's murder. During the trial, several witnesses testified seeing Timothy and a group of friends sneak into the drive-in through a hole in the fence. Timothy and his friends then confronted a group of rival gang members near the concession stand. After the movie ended, Timothy's group stood near Michael's car as he waited to leave the drive-in. One witness said she saw Timothy reach into his waistband, while another witness said she saw him grab Michael and open fire. A third witness said he bragged about the shooting the next day. After 3.5 hours of deliberation, a jury found Timothy guilty of murder for the death of Michael Booth. Timothy was sentenced to 45 years in prison. Other violent incidents were reported in Tuscaloosa, Alabama, Springfield, Massachusetts, and numerous other places. Many theaters hired additional security, while others decided to stop showing the film altogether. Just like Colors, Boys in the Hood had pushed the LA gang culture mainstream. LA gangs continued to spread, and the migration continued to make its way into music. On May 29th, 1992, rapper DJ Quick released the song Just Like Compton. In the song, Quick talks about starting out as a local Compton artist, but as his music began to travel, so did he. He began performing in cities and towns that he underestimated. He believed that Compton was the roughest place in America, and being a member of Treetop Pyru, Quick thought he had made it through the worst. He believed traveling to different cities and towns would be a way for him to escape gangbanging and violence, but he was wrong. In the first verse, he details going to the Bay Area to do a show and a brawl breaking out during his performance. On March 23rd, 1991, Quick was performing at the Jam Zone nightclub in Daly City, near San Francisco. Some of the attendees were heard yelling Fillmore and Hunters Point, which are neighborhoods in San Francisco. Moments later, they rushed the stage. The brawl moved outside and shots were fired, but luckily, no one was hit. It's estimated that 75 people were involved in the melee. Because San Francisco wasn't well known in the rap industry at the time, it's believed that Quick said the incident took place in Oakland because it was more well known due to the Black Panthers, rappers like Too Short, and kingpins like Felix Mitchell and Daryl Reed. In the second verse, he visits St. Louis. He says the weather was hot and the people were country and had gold teeth. He also talks about visiting the Smith Center and Gus's Fashions and Shoes. Gus's was owned by a man named Gus Tortogrosso and was a staple in the city of St. Louis. From starter jackets to the latest sneakers, Gus's had it all. Rappers, singers, athletes, and actors all stopped by Gus's anytime they hit the city. On one occasion, the 2 Live crew visited the store and thousands of people gathered along Tucker Boulevard and Washington Avenue to meet them.
We have a ringside seat here as we look at 2 Live crew. This store is literally bubbling with people.
Quick stated that he was met with nothing but love while visiting St. Louis, but his feelings quickly changed later that night. After performing, Quick sat down at the table to sign some autographs. Waiting in line were a group of young Crips that had already planned to test Quick, and once they made it to the front of the line, they did just that. One of them said, "Hey, cuh, can I get an autograph?" Quick told him not to come at him with all that gang stuff and signed the Crips paper and handed it back to him. The Crip then threw the paper at Quick and flipped over the autograph table, which led to a brawl. In the third verse, he visits San Antonio, Texas. He says that he believes San Antonio was full of cowboys, but he was shocked to find that Crips and Bloods had taken hold of the city. After the performance, a shooting took place between some of the attendees. One of the men was hit in the head and died on the street. Quick's crew put a bulletproof vest on him. They then left out the back exit and began making their way to their van. Moments later, someone opened fire on Quick's crew and they returned fire, leading to a shootout. Luckily, no one was hit and the crew was able to make it to the van and flee the scene. In the final verse, he visits Denver, Colorado. On October 13th, 1991, Quick Quick was performing at the Mammoth Event Center when a group of Crips walked towards the stage and started yelling out their gang and throwing up gang signs. The Crips then started throwing beer bottles at Quick. Quick and his crew picked up some of the bottles and threw them back. A 40-ounce bottle hit one of the Crips in the face and a brawl ensued. 2 hours later, Denver police arrested Quick at his hotel and charged him with assault. He was later released on $5,000 bond. The Denver Crips told a different story. They said Quick was making blood references and throwing up gang signs while he was on stage, so they responded. On October 19th, 1992, Quick arrived at the Denver County Courthouse. He was met by fans as well as process servers who were waiting to hand him notices that he was being sued by an attendee and the show's promoter. Quick tried to dodge them, but was eventually served. Meanwhile, in the courthouse, the prosecution's case fell apart almost immediately. One witness that said Quick had thrown the bottle changed his story and said he wasn't sure if he did, while Quick and 3 other witnesses told the court that he didn't throw any bottles. The judge sided with the defense. In a later interview, Quick reflected on these incidents. He stated, "I was representing the B card pretty tough. Like I wasn't a super banged out gangbanger, but some of the Crips in some of these places I was going kind of wasn't having it. Me being naive as I was to the fact that gangbanging did go a little bit further than California, and to go out of town and see that motherfuckers really didn't have nothing to lose." When most people think of the Pacific Northwest, they think of forest, oceanside cliffs, and snow-capped mountains. But in Tacoma, Washington, it's a different story. Tacoma is a city located roughly 30 miles southwest of Seattle. The city is home to numerous neighborhoods such as Yakima Hill, Shalishan, McKinley Hill, Fern Hill, and numerous others. But the most infamous neighborhood in Tacoma is Hilltop. Hilltop was always known as a black area due to redlining. The neighborhood never received as much funding or assistance as the surrounding areas. On April 20th, 1980, Cuba's leader Fidel Castro announced that all Cubans wishing to immigrate to the U.S. were free to do so. He stationed boats off the coast and had them shuttle people from Cuba to the U.S. The Cuban refugees hit Florida en masse, and from there, they spread throughout the country. What most didn't know at the time was Castro also sent a huge portion of Cuba's prison population to the U.S. Alongside the family searching for a better life were robbers, drug dealers, and murderers. Miami and numerous other cities saw an uptick in crime. Hoping to secure federal funding, Tacoma civic leaders accepted a large number of Cuban refugees. Many of them settled in the Hilltop neighborhood and immediately took over the drug trade. During this time, LA gang members had flooded Seattle and essentially oversaturated its drug market, so members of the Rolling 60s and Watergate Crips hit Tacoma. At the same time, a young man named Dwayne Parker also wanted to carve out a section of the territory and drug market. Dwayne had spent most of his childhood in Bradenton, Florida, and by all accounts was a good kid until his mother remarried and his stepfather began abusing him. He also had Dwayne sell drugs for him and on one occasion use a handsaw to cut police handcuffs off his wrists. At the age of 12, Dwayne's family relocated to Tacoma, and by age 15, he was in and out of juvenile hall and had fully embraced the streets. He was influenced by LA gang members, but he and a group of friends wanted to keep their own identity and represent where they were from, so they formed the Hilltop Bloods. The gang quickly grew in membership and became the top dogs on the hilltop, but just a few blocks away, near the intersection of 23rd and K Street, a group of young men were forming their own gang. Brothers Diamond and Malone Boyd were doing business with the LA dealers, but wanted to create their own thing. So the Boyd brothers, members of the Bond family, and some of their friends came together and formed the Hilltop Crips. The Cubans and the local gangs began pushing the LA dealers out and took the market for themselves. The money was pouring in and everyone was eating. During this time, Crip and Blood gangs began popping up all over the city. Tacoma is a melting pot of different races and cultures, and this fact is reflected in the gangs there. Blacks, whites, Latinos, Asians, Islanders, and even Native Americans adopted the gang culture. Some of the most infamous gangs reside on the city's east side, such as the East Side Pyrus or ESP and the original Local Boys Bloods or OLB. Both gangs claim 44th Street and have always been on good terms. The OLBs originated in LA as the Oriental Lazy Boys, but shortly after hitting Tacoma, they changed their name to be more inclusive of other races, but the gang has remained primarily Cambodian. Initially, the gang feuds were at a minimum. Everyone had carved out a piece of territory and controlled their own share of the market, but things quickly took a turn for the worse. The Hilltop Crips and the Hilltop Bloods went to war for control of the neighborhood. Ultimately, the Crips came out on top and expanded their territory, but the feuds wouldn't stop there. On August 28, 1988, two Hilltop Crips drove through the east side and shot up multiple Blood hangouts. In one instance, a stray bullet barely missed a newborn baby, and in another incident, a group of Blood members were almost hit. The Bloods got into their car and began chasing the Crips, leading to a rolling gunfight on the streets and freeway. The Bloods pursued the vehicle back to Hilltop. They then returned to the east side and changed cars. They gathered more Bloods Bloods and planned a revenge attack. Just before midnight, 2 carloads of Eastside Bloods made their way to Hilltop. As the group made their way towards the intersection of Sheridan Avenue and 23rd Street, they noticed a group of people sitting inside a silver Jeep Cherokee parked along the street. Inside the Jeep was Tyra DeCory, Khalili McMichael, Michael Jeter, and Bernard Houston. The Bloods watched the Jeep for a few minutes and believed that it was the same vehicle that had shot at them earlier that day. The 2 cars then drove slowly down the street with their headlights off. The group inside of the Jeep noticed them. Bernard and Michael then told everyone to get out. As the cars pulled up, someone inside one of the cars said, "What's up, Blood?" followed by multiple gunshots. Michael and the women began running to a nearby 24-hour market. As they ran, Michael was hit in the right thigh. He made it to the market and asked for help, but sadly, Bernard wasn't as fortunate. After exiting the Jeep, he was hit in the head and was found lying on the ground in front of the Jeep. He had a .22 caliber revolver clutched in his right hand. The weapon had 5 live rounds in the cylinder, but the 6th round had been fired. Bernard was transported to the hospital and placed on life support. 2 days after the shooting, on August 30th, Bernard Houston was pronounced dead. He was 17 years old. After their initial investigation, detectives gathered that the shooting was gang-related. Bernard was a member of the Hilltop Crips and went by the nickname Clown. Michael was also a member of the gang and went by the nickname Psych. Outside of that, detectives had little to go on and the murder went unsolved. The Crips went on a warpath. It was open season on all rival gangs and anyone that they believed may have played a part in Bernard's death. About a week after the shooting, near the same intersection, a group of armed Hilltop Crips approached a man named Aaron Brown and accused him of having a hand in Bernard's death. Aaron denied it and attempted to reason with the gang since he knew a couple of the Crips, but one of the women with the group insisted that she saw Aaron in one of the cars and that she witnessed him open fire on Bernard. The Crips talked amongst themselves for a few moments as Aaron stood nearby. Moments later, the Crips opened fire on Aaron, hitting him in the leg and shattering his femur bone. Aaron's brother attempted to pull a gun and return fire, but Aaron stopped him because he didn't want to make things worse. Investigators never stopped working the Bernard Houston case, and in 2013, they began making arrests. A 46-year-old man named Brian Allen was arrested on April 14th. Brian was a Canadian citizen. After serving 8 years in prison for a 1994 drug conviction, he was deported to Canada, where he began working as a personal trainer. In 2011, Tacoma police issued a warrant for his arrest. Investigators discovered that he had been recently married and traveled to Mexico for his honeymoon. They then coordinated his arrest with Mexican authorities. He was turned over to police in Texas and then taken to Pierce County Jail in Tacoma and held on $2 million bail. A 48-year-old man named Nathaniel Miles was arrested on April 24th. He had been working as a landscaper in nearby Steilacoom at the time of his arrest. His bail was set at $2 million. A 45-year-old man named Anthony Rawls was arrested on April 25th. His bail was set at $2 million. A 45-year-old man named Daryl Lee was serving a 10-year prison sentence for a 2008 drug conviction when he was charged. He was transported to Pierce County Jail on May 7th. His bail was set at $2 million. A 42-year-old man named Terrence Miller was serving a 4-year prison sentence for a 2009 firearm conviction in Michigan when he was charged. He was transported to Pierce County Jail on July 16th. His bail was set at $1 million. Another man named Joseph Courtney was also set to face charges, but he passed away in prison while serving a 13-year sentence for a 1992 murder conviction. Brian, Terrace, and Daryl all made deals with the prosecution. In exchange for their testimonies against Anthony and Nathaniel, they would receive much lighter sentences. The men told the court that Bernard and Michael opened fire on Anthony and Nathaniel during a spree of shootings on the east side. Anthony and Nathaniel then recruited them for a revenge mission that night, and just before midnight, the group piled into 2 cars and made their way to Hilltop. In one car, Brian drove Anthony and Daryl, and in the other car, Nathaniel drove Terrace and Joseph. Shortly afterwards, they spotted the Jeep and pulled up alongside of it. Brian and Anthony stepped out of the car and gunfire erupted. Brian Allen received 1 year and 8 months in prison. Daryl Lee received 1 year and 4 months in prison, and Terrence Miller received a little over a year in prison. Anthony Rawls was sentenced to 27 years in prison, and Nathaniel Miles was also sentenced to 27 years in prison. This type of violence became the new norm, and law enforcement could do little to stop it. Gangs had the city under siege. On March 24th, 1989, a 22-year-old man named Warren Smith was driving on the east side, along with 2 young women, 17-year-old Tara Warfeld and 17-year-old Brenda Harris. During the ride, Brenda waved to a man who was talking with a group of Hilltop Crips that were sitting inside of a car. The Crips had mistakenly believed that Brenda threw up a blood gang sign. They then began chasing Warren's car. After a short pursuit, the cars ended up on a dead-end street. The Crips then opened fire between 13 and 20 times with at least 3 different guns. One of the rounds entered through the rear window and hit Brenda in the back of her head. She was later pronounced dead. Before long, police had 4 suspects in custody: 26-year-old Charles Broughton, 19-year-old Daryl Massey, 18-year-old Gregory Smith, and a minor, DeMarcus Mikes. DeMarcus was arrested after returning to the scene of the crime to look for a missing part of the Crips car that had fallen off. The others were arrested within the next 13 hours. Charles and DeMarcus chose to testify against Daryl and Gregory in exchange for lighter sentences. Charles told the court that Daryl had taken the car used in the murder from a woman at gunpoint after she expressed hesitation in letting him borrow it. The group then went to the east side looking for Bloods. Charles said prior to the murder, he and DeMarcus had to stop Daryl and Gregory from opening fire on a cop that had someone pulled over on the side of the road. He went on to say that after the murder, Gregory intended to open fire on a truck driver that had cut them off on the freeway. Ultimately, Daryl and Gregory were found guilty of murder for the death of Brenda Harris, as well as the attempted murders of Warren Smith and Tara Warfield. Daryl Massey and Gregory Smith were each sentenced to 41 years in prison. Daryl wasn't the first Massey to make the news. On January 10th, 1987, his 13-year-old nephew Barry Massey and Barry's friend, 15-year-old Michael Harris, walked into a store at the Steilacoom Marina. They pulled a gun on the store owner, Paul Wang, and demanded the money from the register. They felt that Paul was taking too long and opened fire, hitting him in the head and stomach. After seeing that he was still alive, they stabbed him 7 times. The pair then took cash from the register, grabbed some fishing rods and candy, and fled the store. They were later captured and each sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, making Barry the youngest person in the United States to ever receive such a sentence. In 2012, the Supreme Court ruled it unconstitutional for juveniles to receive life without parole. In 2014, both Barry and Michael were resentenced, and in 2016, both men were released from prison. In January of 1987, Sergeant Bill Folk was an Army Ranger stationed at Fort Lewis near Tacoma. Bill had grown tired of living in the barracks and wanted to purchase a home. He visited a nearby realtor and asked for a list of houses for sale. The cheapest house available was $10,000 and was located on Ash Street in Hilltop. The home was bare bones and had no electrical wiring, no plumbing, no windows or doors. Bill purchased the home and began renovating it. Once he had a functional bathtub, sink, and toilet, he moved in. Initially, the street was quiet and Bill got along well with the neighbors. His next door neighbor Ruben even let him run an extension cord from his home until Bill was able to get his electrical wiring done. In spring of 1989, Bill began doing rehearsal missions for the invasion of Panama, causing him to leave home for weeks on end. He stated that every time he returned home, the neighborhood had gotten worse. After returning home from one rehearsal mission, he noticed a large group of people standing outside of a house across the street. He asked one of his neighbors about them, and she told him that those people are Crips, and the home is a drug house. Initially, Bill had a "don't mess with me and I won't mess with you" type attitude about the situation, but after the Crips began harassing his neighbors, he wanted to do something. He and Ruben began conducting surveillance on the home. They took photographs, wrote down license plate numbers, and videotaped transactions. Bill and Ruben then showed the evidence to police, but were told that they couldn't help, stating that it would be hard to prove that they were actually moving drugs, and a lot of prosecutors don't pick up such cases. In July of 1989, there was a day of back and forth shootings between Hilltop and the Bloods. One of these shootouts took place on Ash Street. Once the cops showed up to investigate, they were essentially told off by the Crips. Bill spoke to the officers and asked why they didn't arrest anyone. The officer replied that due to department policies and city politics, it was nothing they could do. The Crips continued to dominate Ash Street, and before long, it had become an open-air drug market. In early September of that year, Bill and a few of his neighbors attended a community meeting. The meeting was led by then Police Chief Ray Hetland. The meeting was tense. Ray attempted to downplay the drugs and gangs that had taken hold of the city, but Bill and the community pushed back and shared their experiences with dealers and gang members and how law enforcement was doing little to stop it. There were 1,300 drug houses operating throughout the city, and only an 8-man task force was assigned to shutting them down. After a few minutes of back and forth, Ray moved Bill's group to another room to speak to an assistant chief. During the meeting, the group laid out all of the pictures, videos, and notes they had taken in regards to the drug house on Ash Street. The assistant chief told them nothing could be done. Unbeknownst to Bill, a local newspaper reporter had gotten into the room and seen everything. The next morning, the newspaper ran an article about the neighbors on Ash Street and their attempts to shut down the drug house. The attention of the article scared away a majority of the drug house's business, and traffic went from 100 cars a day to essentially none overnight. That September, Bill and his neighbors planned a block party to celebrate the victory, but the city shut it down, citing that it was too dangerous and they didn't want to be held liable for any violence that may occur. Bill then decided to throw a cookout at his house instead. On Saturday, September 23rd, 1989, Bill hosted the cookout. Early on, everything was going well. People from all over the neighborhood showed up, and some of Bill's fellow Army Rangers showed up to support, but before long, the Crips also showed up. They began throwing rocks, bottles, and rotten fruit that had fallen from nearby trees at guests. Bill and two of his Ranger friends walked across the street and confronted the Crips, and the groups began to argue. One Crip told Bill that they were going to come back that night and kill him. Throughout the day, the Crips continued to yell things, throw things at the house, and make guns with their fingers and take aim at the home. Bill asked his guests if they wanted to end the party and leave. They said no. Bill still had some leftover lumber from the renovation, so he took a few wood boards outside and stationed them on the front lawn John. Moments later, the Crips drove slowly by the house and shot a bullet into the air. Bill then called Fort Lewis and told them that his house was going to be attacked and he needed every available ranger to show up. Shortly afterwards, 15 armed rangers showed up to the house. The rangers and neighbors that had guns then took positions around the home as 20 Crips stood in the darkness along the street. At around 9:30, gunshots went off. The groups exchanged fire for about 30 minutes with hundreds of rounds being fired. Bullets destroyed nearby cars and homes. A patrol car raced down Ash Street during the shootout, but quickly reversed after witnessing the severity of the situation. A while later, more officers arrived and the Crips fled the scene and ran towards a nearby park but were ultimately rounded up by officers. The rangers and neighbors were asked to identify the shooters, but they told officers that it was too dark during the shooting and they weren't able to see any faces. Officers arrested a Crip named Frankie Strickland for assault and another Crip named Daniel Vaughn for unlawful use of a weapon. Officers confiscated 2 rifles, 1 shotgun, 8 semi-automatic pistols, and 1 .44 Magnum revolver from the Rangers. Bill called Fort Lewis to report the shooting to his superiors, and moments later they arrived at his home and ordered the Rangers back to base. Bill and his neighbors refused to leave the home and stayed positioned just in case any more shooting occurred. The official story was there was no injuries, but Bill stated that 3 Crips were hit and he personally witnessed one get hit in the shoulder and fall to the ground. It's believed that none of the Crips went to the hospital because it's procedure to alert law enforcement if someone shows up with a bullet wound. Word of the shootout quickly spread throughout the country. News crews raced to Ash Street the next morning and each side wanted to get their version of events heard. Bill and the neighbors claimed the Crips fired the first shot, but the Crips and some of the other neighbors stated that Bill's side opened fire first. They went on to say that Bill had been antagonizing them for months and he called the Rangers in order to intimidate them. The scene became so heated that women from each side began fighting in front of the news crews, and a picture of the scuffle made its way into the newspaper. In the following days, police doubled the amount of patrols in the neighborhood and the army forbid any of its soldiers from going to the area. Local politicians and police were embarrassed by the incident. Many asked how did they let the neighborhood get so bad that military members and gang members had a 30-minute gunfight in the middle of a residential neighborhood. The army condemned the incident. They left Bill to deal with the blowback on his own, and one of his superiors stated that he would personally see that Bill was never promoted. Ultimately, Bill was pushed out of the army and joined the National Guard and later joined the DEA. The shooting put the Hilltop Crips on the map, but it also put the gang in the crosshairs of law enforcement. Officers began doing routine sweeps and building cases against the members, ultimately even taking down some of its founding members, such as the Boyd brothers, with each of them being sentenced to over 20 years in prison. In 1993, police and the Hilltop Action Coalition put together an anti-drug plan. The plan included installing bulletproof surveillance cameras along 23rd Street and 25th Street, as well as improving street lighting and removing bushes where gang members would hide or stash drugs and weapons. The plan also included teaching landlords how to evict dealers. Also in 1993, Washington became the first state to pass the 3 Strikes Law. The 3 Strikes Law states that an adult who commits 3 serious felonies on 3 separate occasions would automatically be sentenced to life without the possibility of parole.
Now, those who commit crimes should be punished, and those who commit repeated violent crimes should be told, when you commit a 3rd violent crime, you will be put away and put away for good. 3 strikes and you are out.
But the new policies and pressure from law enforcement did little to stop the violence. On Saturday, May 24th, 1997, at around 1 a.m., a group of friends had just left the movies and were driving through Hilltop in a Chevy Caprice. Our shout-out Themer sat in the driver's seat, Mashana G sat in the passenger seat, Derek Bahard, Niambi Thompson, and Corey Pittman sat in the back seat. The group drove north on Grant Street and stopped at 15th Street. At the same time, an Oldsmobile was stopped on the other side of 15th Street heading south on Grant. Inside the car was Terrence Powell, Kamani Carter, Kamani's younger brother Marcus, Abram Potts, and James Cavill. All of them were Eastside Blood gang members. They noticed the Caprice and believed that it belonged to members of the Hilltop Crips. After the Caprice turned west on 15th Street, the Oldsmobile followed it. As Terrence drove, Kamani told him to speed up. The Oldsmobile overtook the Caprice and Kamani leaned out the front passenger window with the Mac 90 rifle. He then aimed at the Caprice and opened fire over a dozen times. The Oldsmobile then sped away. The Caprice was riddled with holes and crashed into a pole. The group exited the car and ran to a nearby convenience store for help. Mashana was hit in the left shoulder and Arshad was hit in the buttock and right wrist. They began asking each other where was Corey and believed that he was running right behind them, but sadly they were mistaken. Corey never made it out of the car. He was hit and pronounced dead at the scene. He was 19 years old. Corey was from Tacoma and had previously attended Lincoln High School, where he was senior class treasurer, president of the Martin Luther King Jr. Club, and homecoming king. After graduating, he enrolled in Alabama State University, where he majored in political political science and had plans of becoming a lawyer. He was in his sophomore year at the time of the shooting and was back in Tacoma visiting family and friends. Corey's funeral was held on Saturday, May 31st, 1997 at the First United Methodist Church. More than 800 people attended the service. Within a few days, investigators had arrested everyone involved in the shooting. All of them received heavy prison sentences, but most notably, the driver and shooter. Terrence was sentenced to 33 years in prison, and since Kamani shot from a vehicle, he was found guilty of aggravated first-degree murder, which carries an automatic sentence of life without the possibility of parole. In 2021, the Supreme Court ruled such sentences unconstitutional for 18, 19, and 20-year-olds. In July of 2022, Kamani was resentenced and released with time served. Naughty by Nature is a rap group from East Orange, New Jersey. East Orange, also known as EO or Ill Town, is a city located just northwest of Newark. The group is comprised of Tretch, Vin Rock, and DJ KG. In 1991, they released the hit song OPP. The song reached number 6 on the Billboard Hot 100 chart. Their next single was titled Everything's Gonna Be Alright, which was also met with great reception. In 1992, the group released Uptown Anthem. The song was made for the Juice movie soundtrack, which Tretch had an acting role in. Also in 1992, the group released the song Hip Hop Parade. The music video was directed by Spike Lee and features cameos from Queen Latifah, Eazy-E, Run DMC, Tupac, and Spike Lee himself. After a slate of hits, Naughty began branching out and looking for artists. They took on the groups The Rowdin' Rascals, The Cruddy Click, and The Road Dogs. The Road Dogs were a group from Inglewood, California, and was comprised of G-Love and Swamp Rat. They gained Naughty's attention after rapping for them, and before long, the Road Dogs were in New Jersey working with Naughty. They first appeared in 1993 after being featured on Naughty by Nature song Click Cow, along with the Rowdin' Rascals and Cruddy Click. They were also featured on the song Hang Out and Hustle. Rhymes weren't the only thing the Road Dogs took to New Jersey. The group were members of the Inglewood Queen Street Bloods. They hit East Orange and told the local gangs about LA gang culture and what it meant to be a blood. The local gangs in the area such as the Gutter Rats, Drama Lords, Steel Click, and the Chain Gang became inspired and decided to unify under one umbrella, Double I. Double I represented the union between Ill Town and Inglewood, and with the stamp of Queen Street, Double I became Bloods. The gang formed in the area of 18th and William Street and is considered the first blood gang on the East Coast with official ties to an LA area blood gang. The Double I's quickly became a force on the streets, from robberies to assaults to drug sales to murders. The Double I's were doing it all. Law enforcement arrested numerous members of the gang in hopes of slowing their growth, but that only had the opposite effect. The Double I's quickly became a force within jail as well. Among the ranks of the Double I's was a young man named Tawan Butler, who went by the nickname Massacre. Massacre quickly climbed the ranks of the gang, and by the year 2000, he had taken a leadership position within the gang. Massacre's second in command was a man named Quandre Smith, who went by the nickname Trouble. The Double I's quickly became one of the top gangs in the city. They booted all the drug dealers from their territory and replaced them with Double I members, essentially cornering a large share of the market. They bought drugs from New York and transported them to East Orange, and dealers worked in 4 6-hour shifts in order to sell 24 hours a day. Massacre and Trouble held regular meetings where the gang discussed expanding their territory and getting rid of rival dealers, gang members, and anyone that got in their way. The Double I's were making money from all different avenues, but in a lot of cases, the members were unable to spend it due to it being dirty money. So to help these issues, Trouble enlisted the help of a man named Brian Williams, also known as Dirty O. Dirty O was involved in credit card and false identity schemes. Trouble paid Dirty O a fee and waited for him to come through with the documents, but Dirty O never produced anything. Trouble believed that he had been beaten out of the money and wanted revenge. On April 29th, 2000, Trouble found Dirty O at a bar. As Dirty O entered his car, Trouble opened fire. Dirty O was hit and was later pronounced dead. On October 19th, 2000, a man named Robin Thompson was at a gas station. Massacre was sitting in the car a short distance away when he spotted Robin. He then grabbed his gun, exited the car, and covered his face with a piece of clothing. He began walking towards Robin from behind, and moments later, he opened fire. Robin was hit in the head twice and was later pronounced dead. In 2002, the Double I's developed a scheme involving a group of college students from Wilberforce University in Ohio. A man paid students to act as gun buyers and fill out federal background check forms. The weapons were then given to a middleman who would get them to the Double I's. The straw buyers were able to get 200 weapons in total, and of that 200, about 76 were sent to the Double I's. After the guns hit East Orange, 15 of them were recovered after being used in various crimes. On February 22nd, 2002, the Double I's received a shipment of guns. One of the members was eager to test his out out, so he and another member named Anthony Ward, also known as PB, drove to a location in Newark and a location in Irvington and opened fire on random people on the street. No one was hit during the Newark incident, but one man was killed and 3 more were injured in the Irvington incident. Also in 2002, a man named Bateen Morgan, also known as Bat, and a group of Bloods did a drive-by on a group of rivals near Park and Clinton Avenues. Bat was disappointed that the shooting didn't make the newspaper the next morning. On June 20th, 2002, a group of Double I's were at a bar. The bar was considered a hangout for the gang. Shortly afterwards, a Crip member entered the bar. A high-ranking Double I member instructed another member named Taheen Smith, also known as X, to handle him. X approached the Crip and opened fire. The Crip's hat was pierced, but luckily he survived. On June 30th, 2002, a member named Amir Wynn, also known as Young Gangster, or YG for short, was at a bar with a group of Bloods. Shortly afterwards, YG got into an argument with the woman. The Bloods told YG not to let her disrespect him. In response, he opened fire on the woman. She was hit, but survived. Sadly, this wouldn't be the last case of YG doing something drastic for the gang. On July 25th, 2002, a 29-year-old man named Laquan Brooks was at home with his wife, 8-year-old son, 3-year-old daughter, and the couple's other children. Laquan learned that the Double I's had been trying to recruit the 8-year-old and were pressuring him to transport drugs in his backpack, so he approached some of the members and told them to stay away from his son. One of the Bloods ran to get YG. He told YG that Laquan was disrespecting the gang. YG replied that he was going to show him how to murder someone. YG then retrieved the .380 caliber pistol and made his way to the family's home and called Laquan onto the street. Laquan made his way towards the street, and moments later, YG pulled out the gun and opened fire. Laquan was hit in the chest and fell to the ground. The 8-year-old boy began crying, and YG turned his gun towards him, but quickly lowered it and ran away. Laquan was later pronounced dead. The incident took place in front of Laquan's family and neighbors. On August 2nd, 2002, a bounty hunter named Robert Thompson and 2 other men were executing a bail warrant on a Double I member named Arthena Harvey. As the men ran up a flight of stairs, they came face to face with YG. YG opened fire, hitting Robert in the face, but luckily he survived. Even Double I's own members were not immune from the gang's violence. A member of the gang named Al-Kabir Sori was arrested and charged with murder for killing a witness to another murder, but the charges against Al-Kabir were dismissed. When he returned to the neighborhood, he found that Massacre and Trouble had assigned other dealers to run his territory. Al-Kabir refused to get involved with the gang's business and decided to start dealing on his own. He would also rob fellow members of their profits. This caused tension between Al-Kabir and the rest of the Double I's, which led to even more problems. In one incident, Al-Kabir opened fire on another Double I member named David Austin, also known as Flacco, hitting him in the leg. 9 days later, on January 19th, 2003, Al-Kabir and Flacco were both at a bar called Hawk's Patio Lounge. Flacco left the bar before it closed, and Al-Kabir left the bar at closing time with the woman. Shortly before 4 a.m., witnesses heard gunshots, followed by the sound of a car crash. Al-Kabir was found behind the wheel with a wound to his head. He was later pronounced dead. Flacco was seen searching the vehicle's glove compartment and limping away from the scene. On April 17th, 2004, 4 Bloods were driving around in a stolen PT Cruiser looking for some Crips to rob. Among the group was a man named Samir Moses, also known as Spit Vicious, or SP for short. Shortly afterwards, SP noticed a group of people walking along the street. He told the others that the group were Crips, and one of them had flashed a gang sign at him. The car stopped and SP exited with a gun and his face covered. He approached the group and opened fire. A 16-year-old young man named Anthony Copeland was hit in the chest and fell to the ground. SP then ran back to the car and the Bloods fled the scene. Anthony was later pronounced dead. Afterwards, the gang took the PT Cruiser to another location and set it ablaze in hopes of destroying any evidence. During this time, the feds were building a case against the Double I's, and multiple members of the gang were arrested on federal charges. The charges included conspiracy, robbery, assault, arson, drug charges, firearm charges, attempted murder, and murder. The students at Wilberforce University were also indicted on firearm charges for acting as straw buyers, and James Dillard, the owner of the hole-in-the-wall gun store, was indicted for knowingly selling the firearms to straw buyers. By 2006, all the gang's members pled guilty and received lengthy prison sentences, with 3 of the most notorious members receiving the heaviest sentences. Amir Wynn, also known as YG, received 34 years in prison. Quandary Smith, also known as Trouble, received 30 years in prison. Tawan Butler, also known as Massacre, received 30 years in prison. Although the spread of LA gangs had been mentioned in songs and news specials, the nation was able to get a better understanding of its effects in 1994 when the documentary Gang Wars, Bangin' in Little Rock aired on HBO. The documentary took place on the streets of Little Rock, Arkansas, and showed how much of a hold the Bloods and Crips had on the city. The film follows the original Gangster Crips, also known as OGC, the 23rd Street Crips, also known as Deuce Trey, and the West Side Bloods. A man named Steve Novoychek was the county coroner. Steve watched Little Rock transform from a quiet, family-oriented city to a gang-infested nightmare. He acted as a mediator throughout the film. He visited different gangs in an attempt to calm tensions and end wars. In one scene, he visits the OGCs and brings them some pizzas. Moments later, a car approaches the house and someone inside of the vehicle opens fire multiple times. Luckily, no one was hit.
Anybody get hit?
No, I don't think anybody got hit.
See what I mean? All it was a gang sign thing. All you had to do was go set.
Did she get that? You didn't get it?
You see they threw they set top?
Tell her what happened. Tell her just what happened. They just rode through. That was a drive-by.
You see what happened, don't you? You see what happened? We can't never stand out here without that.
That is a perfect example. I mean, you know, these kids were not doing anything, and this group drove by, and this is retaliation. And what you saw was that car, whoever they were, that went by and started shooting at Ugly Man that was down there. And then, of course, you know, you've got retaliation. And I mean, that just, you know, just takes one of those just a split second, and the person's no longer with us. I mean, just like that.
In 1993, Little Rock hit a record high of murders, and the town officials and law enforcement could do little to stop it. Besides murders, the city saw a rise in all crime, especially drugs and robberies. One case involved a 15-year-old young man named Moses Crawford and his friend, 14-year-old Cleon Perkins. Moses and Cleon walked into Baker's liquor store armed with a handgun and attempted to rob the store. The store's owner pulled out his own gun and opened fire, striking both Moses and Cleon. Cleon died at the scene. Moses ran from the store and made his way to a home a block away. He banged on the door pleading for help, but no one answered. Moses died on the front porch. The home's resident later said she heard him banging on the door, but with all the crime in the neighborhood, she was too afraid to answer. Banging in Little Rock gave the nation an inside look on how gang culture had taken over a whole generation. Many people were able to draw similarities between Little Rock and their own cities and towns. These have been just a handful of stories of the Crips and Bloods migrating from LA to cities and towns all over America. If you would like to see a part 2 where I cover more areas and incidents, let me know in the comments. I want to thank you guys for tuning in. Please like, comment, and subscribe.